Eleanor Blackwood adjusted the lens assembly one final time as the Atlantic wind whipped through her silver hair. At 72, she moved with deliberate precision around the lighthouse machinery, her weathered hands knowing every bolt and gear by memory. The beacon's light swept across the rocky Maine coast, warning ships away from the treacherous shoals that had claimed so many vessels over the decades. "Grandma Ellie, you shouldn't be climbing those stairs alone," called Maya from below, her voice echoing up the spiral staircase. The young woman appeared at the top, slightly breathless from the climb, her dark eyes filled with concern. Eleanor smiled, wiping oil from her fingers with an old rag. "I've been tending this light since before your mother was born, child. These old bones know their business." Maya shook her head but returned the smile. "Stubborn as the granite cliffs, just like Mom always said." She moved to help check the weather instruments. "The town council meeting is next week. Are you sure you won't reconsider their offer?" The older woman's face hardened slightly. "This lighthouse has been in our family since 1892. Your great-great-grandfather built half of these mechanisms with his own hands. Some fancy resort developer from Boston isn't going to tear it down for their spa retreat." They worked together in comfortable silence, maintaining the equipment that had guided ships safely home for over a century. The lighthouse stood on a small island connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway, accessible only at low tide. It was isolated, peaceful, and according to Vincent Ashford of Coastal Luxury Resorts, worth millions as prime waterfront development property. "Tell me again about great-great-grandpa Samuel," Maya said, settling onto an old wooden crate. She was home from maritime engineering school for the summer, learning the family trade. Eleanor's expression softened as she gazed out at the horizon. Samuel Blackwood was a ship's navigator who lost his vessel on these very rocks in 1891. Instead of cursing the coast that took his livelihood, he decided to make sure no other captain would suffer the same fate. She paused, lost in memory. "Built this lighthouse with his own savings and never charged the government a penny. Said the sea had taught him that some things are more important than profit." Maya nodded, having heard the story countless times but never tiring of it. "And now they want to turn it into a luxury hotel." "Over my dead body," Eleanor said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. 3 days later, Vincent Ashford arrived with his entourage. Eleanor watched through binoculars as black sedans carefully navigated the causeway during low tide, their city tires struggling for purchase on the wet stones. She counted 6 men in expensive suits, all following a tall man with perfectly styled hair and predatory eyes. The knock came at exactly noon. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Vincent's smile was practiced and cold. "Such a pleasure to finally meet the owner of this charming property." His gaze swept over the lighthouse with barely concealed disdain. "Though I'm afraid your tenancy here is about to expire." Eleanor stood straight, her hand resting casually on the lighthouse doorframe. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Vincent laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Private property? Not according to our research. It seems your family's old deed has some irregularities. Technicalities that void your claim." He pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. "My associates here represent various interests. Banking, legal, municipal. We've been very thorough." One of his men, a heavy-set attorney named Morris, stepped forward. "The lighthouse property reverts to state ownership due to unpaid maritime fees dating back to 1923. The state has agreed to sell to Mr. Ashford's development group." Maya emerged from behind the lighthouse, carrying a basket of tools. She froze when she saw the men, instinctively moving closer to her grandmother. "Ah, and this must be the granddaughter," Vincent said, his eyes lingering on Maya in a way that made Eleanor's jaw clench. "Don't worry, dear. We'll make sure you both receive adequate compensation for your cooperation." "The answer is no," Eleanor said firmly. Vincent's smile faded. "I don't think you understand. This isn't a negotiation." He nodded to his men, who began spreading out around the lighthouse grounds. "You see, Mrs. Blackwood, this coast has been wild for too long. Unregulated. We're bringing order, civilization. A 5-star resort with helicopter landing pads, private yacht slips. Progress." One of his enforcers, a man named Kruger, kicked over Eleanor's tool bucket, laughing as wrenches and screwdrivers scattered across the rocks. Another began examining the lighthouse's support cables with a knife. "Stop that." Maya stepped forward, only to have Kruger grab her arm roughly. "Easy there, college girl," he sneered. "Maybe you'd like to see how real business gets done." That's when Vincent made his mistake. He shoved Eleanor, hard, sending the elderly woman stumbling backward toward the cliff edge, but Eleanor Blackwood didn't stumble. She absorbed the push, shifted her weight, and straightened with fluid grace. Her eyes, which had seemed tired moments before, now held a dangerous glint. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "I think you should leave now." Vincent laughed. Or what? You'll call the Coast Guard? The local sheriff? They're all on my payroll, old woman. What Vincent didn't know was that Eleanor Blackwood had served 25 years as a Navy SEAL. What he couldn't see were the classified commendations locked in a safe inside the lighthouse, or the muscle memory that decades of retirement couldn't erase. Maya, Eleanor said softly, go inside and lock the door. But Grandma, now. The young woman reluctantly retreated, but Eleanor noticed she positioned herself at a window with a clear view of the grounds. Vincent pulled out a sledgehammer from one of his men's tool bags. This old lighthouse is a safety hazard. Condemned equipment. We're doing the community a service. He swung at the lighthouse's base, the metal ringing against stone. Eleanor moved then, faster than any 72-year-old should have been able to move. Her hand shot out, caught Vincent's wrist, and twisted. The sledgehammer clattered to the ground as Vincent cried out in pain. That's assault. Kruger shouted, reaching inside his jacket. Eleanor's boot connected with his solar plexus before his hand cleared his coat. As he doubled over, gasping, she relieved him of his pistol with practiced efficiency. Navy SEAL, class of 1972, she announced to the remaining men, who had frozen in shock. 25 years of active duty. 2 tours in Vietnam, operations in Panama, the Gulf War. I've forgotten more about warfare than you boys will ever learn about intimidation. Vincent clutched his wrist, his face pale with pain and disbelief. You're bluffing. You're just some old lighthouse keeper. Eleanor chambered around. Test that theory. The enforcers looked between each other, their confidence evaporating. These were men used to intimidating civilians, not facing down trained military personnel. Get off my island, Eleanor said. And don't come back. Vincent's group retreated hastily, but Eleanor knew this wasn't over. She spent the rest of the day preparing, pulling supplies from hidden compartments throughout the lighthouse. Military habits die hard, and she had always maintained emergency stockpiles. That night, Maya sat across from her grandmother at their small kitchen table, staring in amazement. Who are you? Maya finally asked. I mean, I know you're my grandmother, but today, that wasn't the woman who teaches me about lens maintenance and weather patterns. Eleanor sighed, setting down her tea. I'm both, sweetheart. The Navy was my life before this lighthouse became my world. Your grandfather knew, but we agreed that part of my life was over when I retired. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted you to know the woman who tends the light, not the soldier who could take a life. Eleanor's voice was heavy. But some fights come to you whether you want them or not. Maya was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Vincent Ashford isn't the type to give up after one defeat. He'll be back with more men, better weapons, legal pressure. We need to be ready. Over the next 2 days, Eleanor transformed their peaceful lighthouse into a fortress. She showed Maya how to rig early warning systems using the lighthouse's own equipment, how to create defensive positions, and how to use the island's natural terrain to their advantage. The causeway is our choke point, Eleanor explained, pointing to a hand-drawn map. They can only approach at low tide, and only a few at a time. But they'll have boats too, probably try to surround us. Maya watched her grandmother work with growing admiration and concern. Shouldn't we call for help? The real authorities? Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Vincent wasn't lying about having officials in his pocket. The sheriff, half the town council, probably the judge too. Money talks loudest in small coastal towns. On the third morning, they came. Eleanor counted 12 boats approaching from different angles, plus vehicles waiting on the mainland side of the causeway. Through her binoculars, she could see Vincent directing operations from a luxury yacht anchored just outside the reef line. Maya, into the lighthouse, Eleanor commanded, checking her rifle one final time. Stay away from the windows, and if I give the signal, you use the radio to call the Coast Guard station in Portland. Tell them shots fired, officer in distress. Officer in distress? Eleanor smiled grimly. I may be retired, but I'm still a Navy SEAL. That distress call will bring every federal law enforcement agency within 100 miles. The first boat reached the rocky shore as Eleanor took position in the lighthouse's lamp room. The elevation gave her clear sight lines in all directions, and the rotating beacon provided perfect cover for muzzle flashes. Vincent's voice crackled over a megaphone. Last chance, old woman. Surrender now and we'll make this quick. Eleanor's response was a single rifle shot that shattered the megaphone in Vincent's hand. The luxury yacht's captain immediately began backing away from shore. The battle was swift and decisive. Eleanor had spent decades in situations exactly like this, while Vincent's hired guns were used to intimidating defenseless civilians. She picked her targets carefully, wounding, disabling, but not killing. Shoulders, knees, hands. Each shot forced 2 men to retreat, one wounded, one helping. Within minutes, half of Vincent's force was neutralized. The others began retreating to their boats, having quickly realized they were facing a professional, but Vincent wasn't done. As his men fled, he screamed orders over his radio. "Burn it down. If I can't have it, nobody can." Suddenly, Molotov cocktails began raining down on the lighthouse grounds. The old wooden structures caught fire quickly, and Eleanor realized with horror that they were trying to burn her out. Maya's voice echoed up the lighthouse stairs. "Grandma. The equipment room is on fire." Eleanor made a quick decision. She couldn't save all the outbuildings, but she could save the lighthouse itself and make sure Vincent paid for his crimes. She activated an emergency beacon that would bring Coast Guard cutters racing to their position, then descended to help Maya fight the fires. They worked together, using the lighthouse's own fire suppression system and buckets of seawater to contain the damage. The beacon continued to rotate above them, a symbol of resilience that no developer could extinguish. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, Vincent's forces had fled. But Eleanor had captured everything on the lighthouse's security cameras: the threats, the assault, the arson. Vincent's corruption network began unraveling within hours as federal investigators swarmed the area. Sheriff Morrison, Vincent's primary accomplice, was arrested while trying to destroy evidence in his office. The corrupted town council members resigned in disgrace. Vincent himself was found guilty of racketeering, arson, and conspiracy, earning himself a 20-year federal prison sentence. 6 months later, Maya stood beside her grandmother on the lighthouse gallery, watching ships pass safely through the channel. The rebuilt structures gleamed with fresh paint, funded by donations from grateful mariners and coastal communities. "The Coast Guard wants to give you a commendation," Maya said, handing Eleanor an official letter. Eleanor smiled, filing the letter away with her other military honors. "The real reward is knowing this light will keep shining." A group of visitors climbed the lighthouse stairs, led by a young tour guide who began explaining the historical significance of the Blackwood Lighthouse. Eleanor listened with satisfaction as the guide told Samuel's story, then added new chapters about Eleanor's own defense of the family legacy. "Some stories," Eleanor told Maya quietly, "are worth fighting for. Some lights are too important to let go out." Maya nodded, understanding that she was now the keeper of both the lighthouse and its guardian's legacy. In the distance, the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, filled with ships that would always find their way home because one family refused to surrender to greed. The beacon swept across the waves, steady and eternal, just as Eleanor Blackwood intended it to be.